Hello and welcome to tonight's event. We are going to speak about lightning talks about preparing and giving talks. And yeah, all of us kind of have a focus on C++, but today it's like preparing talks about C++ as the main topic. Quick word on this year's conference. We will be hybrid again in Berlin and online, of course. On-site attendees will have access to the online part. The main track is streamed online, and also the side tracks probably that worked very well last year, and we'll do it this year again. There will be a pre-recorded track online, and we will not be streaming like the online track into the conference. That's not a thing. But if you want to be a speaker at this year's conference, please submit your talk until June 25th. And submit early as you can edit your submission, right? So, and this is basically the part what is tonight about, is about submitting talks and preparing talks, giving talks as lightning talks. So we have 4 speakers plus 3 or 4 videos. Should roughly take probably an hour or a bit longer, and then we'll have the panel, so roughly 2 hours. And if you're in Hobilo, we probably hang out after that in the lounge. So this is our lineup tonight. We have Diego Rodriguez-Losada, Kevlin Henney, Victor, Ciura, and myself giving lightning talks live. And then we have, to cover everything, some topics from the previous years, featuring Tina Ulbrich, Gregory, and Chandler Carruth. And with that, let's get started. Our lightning talks. Let's go. Diego, take it away.
Okay. So thanks very much. Thanks very much, James, for inviting me today, and thanks very much everyone for joining. Today I'm going to start a bit with the motivation part and why probably you should be doing C++ talks if you are a C++ programmer. So my name is Diego. And probably some of you know me because I am one of the Conan package manager co-founders, and I have been very active in this role, being an advocate for the project as well. But I have also done many C++ talks in my life. As you can see, I have talks in some of the major conferences, of course, in Meeting C++, in Meeting Embedded, but also in the United States in CPPCon, ACCU, C++ Now, and other conferences. And I've also been a regular. I've been doing multiple every year, one year after the other. But let me explain a little bit about my life, why I have ended doing so many C++ talks. So let's go back a little bit in time until 2001. I was a researcher in robotics, right? And I was doing my research in university, academia, and in simultaneous locational mapping of robotics. It was great, but when you're in academia, you need to publish papers, right? And you need to submit your work to peer-reviewed journals, and I managed to do it. So if you go to my profile, my Scholar Google Scholar profile, you will see that I have a bunch of journals there. These journals allowed me to become a tenure-track professor, which is what I wanted back then. And I managed to do it, but I have to say that all my path, everything started in academic conferences. Because publishing in journals is pretty challenging. It's difficult to get your papers accepted. The level back then was super high. So as this was very complex, I started submitting talks to conferences, to research academic conferences. And in this case, an important difference is that you always have to be a speaker. You have to be a presenter, because otherwise the university, they will not pay for your trip. So attending a conference, an academic conference, is typically very challenging. So most of the people attending the conference are also speakers, like probably 50% of them. It's very different from industry conferences like Meeting C++. but everything started there. I started to meet people, to network. Your visibility as a speaker is much higher, and then you realize that people start to know you, and at the end, the world is not that big, and the people that will be reviewing the journals, and people that will be doing projects and everything is connected. So the more visible you are, the easier is for you to get your job and your word and everything across. And this really helped me a lot. But then eventually I decided to quit academia and to quit my tenure track position. And then I started in 2012. I started to try. This was the first attempt to do a C++ dependency manager, which, as you can know, is pretty challenging, right? So I did this jump, and then I found myself in the same position. I had to do something. I had to spread the word about this Vico thing, right? And the way to do it is, okay, you need to go to conferences, but also you start submitting your idea or your proposal to conference, and then you are rejected because maybe this is not what the conference wants. It is not alignment. So for this, you see here a lot of talks, in this case, that they are talking about Conan, most of them, and everything. But what I want to do is to also focus on the first talks that there was given. Okay, if we go back to the first talks that got accepted for me in the C conferences, these were them. So we can see the first time, for example, is developing an embedded application for the IoT. Okay, in this case, I was creating like a full system with Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and the MQTT protocol and a bunch of sensors, motors, actuators, everything, and doing a live demo. Okay. Note that this is not related to what I wanted to do. I wanted to spread the word about my project, but there was no way. It was very challenging back then. So I decided to step back and say, hey, what is happening? I need to be there. The important idea is I need to be there. I need to be in meeting C++ in Berlin. Okay, that's the first step. And something similar happened in CPPCon. I wanted to be there, and then I submitted a talk about Python and C++. Nothing related to my project at all. Just how you integrate those things. And both talks were good. They worked very well. They got views and everything. But note that I had to approach my way of thinking in a different way. In this case, I was thinking, okay, I need to be there. So what I can submit that will get me accepted in the first time. Okay. And then, of course, the way I think about that, thought about that is, okay, first things I like. Okay, no way that I'm going to prepare a topic that I dislike. It's not going to be. You need to enjoy it. Okay, it's going to be a big effort, right? So you better enjoy it. Okay. Then you really need to think about the audience. Hey, what the audience wants to hear? Okay, and then things that will be of interest of the audience, of course. And then the last but very important thing is that, hey, there is also competition in this market. There will be people submitting talks for the same topics, right? So if you try to find a topic that there is interesting, but is not so crowded as other topics, you will probably have more chances of being there, right? And it's important in this case that you might have, because, hey, we most likely are working in a company, right? Our company probably want us to be there to promote our things or whatever. It's likely that this is going to happen. But you cannot think that way. You need to step back and you need to become a bit more, say, altruist, and you need to remove those things, at least initially. Okay, it's important. Then you will be able to spread the word and everything, but you need to remove that from the equation, at least until you start getting in the system. And also, something that I really haven't ever taken into account is the time to prepare. If you try to go for easier topics, something that you are very comfortable and everything, you are going probably to bias and not consider well enough the 3 points above that I think are very important. So, but I I wanted more. If you know me, some of the that you know me is I needed more. Okay, as you can guess, I love challenges. I built a package manager for C++, so I'm a bit crazy in this in this sense, right? So I wanted to do a bit more, and then in the same way of thinking that hey, if there is something that I like, there is something that the audience wants, and there is no one else that is doing that, then there is a space for doing things similar to C++ talks or close to C++ talks, but not exactly C++ talk to a conference. So in this sense, there are tons of opportunities around you to do this. Many conferences, they have lightning talks. They are easier. They don't have a review process, and everything is a very good way to start doing talks about what you like. It's very easy to get there and get in front of people. You have local meetups, which are very willing to accept your talk. Even if you're a newbie, if you are the first time, go to your local meetup, talk to them, propose a topic. They are going to love it. So just do it. I've also done like podcasts and several workshops, like full day workshops and everything. But probably my best contribution to the C++ talks like things is the quizzes. I've been doing like a C++ crazy quiz for several years in Meeting C++. It's like a 2 hours long social event in person. We don't do, because hybrid or online, it doesn't really make sense. So it's a social event in person. People work in teams. I've tried to do it like 20 minutes Kahoots in some other conference, but it's really not the same. So the best is really the big format, the large format. And this is more or less how it looks like. It will be like a bunch of people. They will work in teams after dinner, having some drinks and everything, and they have lots of fun because I try to go a bit beyond C++. So, for example, this is one of the quizzes that has become like a classic in the quiz. You can use this. This is absolutely a standard regular C++. Your IDs support this, so you can open VS Code and type this code, and it will compile and it will work. And this is this is C++, but this is not C++. This is why my talk is called Beyond C++ Talks, because there are things that you can do more, and they will still be great. As you can guess, this is also C++ code, right? And it compiles and it prints something, and then when I put in the screens, the audience, they had to guess what was the answer there. And as you can guess, it's no way they will ever read the code. It's just it's a puzzle. They need to solve the puzzle. So this is the way that I go beyond just the standard C++ code, and I try to do something different, right? For example, for the final list, the way to get the final winner was this kind of questions. As you can see, this is not really a question. This is just my personal opinion of how you should be putting braces. And the winner, they had to guess what was my personal preference. So as you can see, this is just mostly a joke. But it happened that it worked really well. Okay, this is one of the biggest compliments that you can get. So in this case, it was Cybrand. It was writing this about one of the quizzes. Okay, and honestly, getting this from Cy is like it is really to my something that got to my heart. So I was so proud of this. This is one of the reasons that I've been repeating in Meeting C++ the quiz over and over the years, and trying to improve myself, going higher and higher the bar, because if this is what people think, then it's definitely worth doing that. Again, not just to finish my talk, is note that this is basically, the quizzes is also in the same intersection. It's things that I liked, things that the community wanted. They wanted to have fun. They wanted to have a social event. They wanted to enjoy it, right? And there was opportunity. There was no one doing that in meetings, because there was like a new idea, and James, of course, was great to accept this crazy idea of doing the quiz and this work. And of course, it's not aligned at all in this sense with business, because Conan is not there beyond a little bit of branding and the sponsoring. I'm not talking about Conan at all. And the amount of work it needs to prepare is months. It takes it's way more than any talk that I've done ever. It takes a huge amount of time. So why do I do this? Okay, because first I said I needed to do more. I needed to be there. I needed to have an impact because I have a message to spread. Okay, and I realized that doing these things it satisfies my three conditions. Right, something very important for you, the people that are listening. I'm shy. I'm an introvert myself. Okay, I suffer every time I was a professor. Every time that I had to go on front of the classroom, I suffered because I'm not that type of person. Okay, this shouldn't be a reason. You can do it, and I also did it even when I was not supported by the company. The first time because there was no company, actually, so I have to pay with my pocket money to travel to Berlin. And the fourth is huge. In this case, for the quizzes, talk is the effort will be less. So my conclusions here, AA, if it is an investment that pays over time, results aren't immediate. Um, you need to consider, you need to adjust to get your talks to a conference. Then why you should be doing a conference? And then I will tell you very clearly, this is something, is nothing helped me more in my career. Nothing changed my career, my opportunities more than being at conferences. It allowed me to become a full-time professor, a tenure track professor, going to conferences and speaking there. It got me the possibilities, the chances to be in front of the audience, to meet people, to spread the word about what I wanted to spread the word about my package manager without talking about the package manager. And it worked. It really worked. So my conclusion here is just do it, because doing C++ talks and beyond, anything that you can do for the community, it will get you back. It will be your best marketing for yourself, your company, your products, as long as you do it. So just do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Let me go back to my slides. That was really great talk. Thank you, Diego. And of course, the quiz. Yes, that's a favorite of everyone who has ever been at Meeting C++, I think. So next is a talk from Tina Ulbrich, and you're ready to go.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. When you talk about giving conference talks to other people, most people say that they don't have anything to talk about. And I said the same in the past as well. And now I have given several talks already. I still consider myself a beginner speaker, but I realized that I do have something to talk about. And in this talk, I'm going to share some possible talk ideas, and I hope you will get inspired. So first, ask yourself, what do you do? What do you do at work? What is your daily job? How do you work? Which technologies are you using? Which ones are you writing or expanding? We very easily fall into the thinking that we don't do anything interesting, or that everyone already knows what we know. But that's not true. I can guarantee that you have a unique knowledge in lots of different areas, and talking about it will benefit others. The same applies to any project, like private projects you're working on, or open source projects, like anything you're working on or using. Or think about which questions, problems, or challenges have you or someone in your team encountered. There's a high probability that many people have the same questions and are in need of getting them answered. So why not turn those discussions and solutions into conference talks? So next, maybe ask yourself, what do you want to learn more about? Have you ever read an article or watched a conference talk, but you wanted to learn more about the subject? Giving a talk is the perfect opportunity for you to get the topic, to get to know the topic in depth. You will always learn a lot in the process of writing a talk, way more than just using some library feature. Or maybe you learned about some interesting concept or language feature and you want to figure out how you can use it in your code. I always love to learn about real-life examples of the new features. So that's why I personally also like to give talks that are more practice-oriented. But don't think you need to be cutting edge to be giving a talk. The basics are very underrepresented at conferences, and most people don't use the new standards right away anyways. So consider talking about the basics. And as I said, not everyone has this knowledge, and many people will benefit from it. And tell us what excites you. Do you like the theory over examples? Then do a talk about theory. Do you like examples and live coding more than theory? Then do that. Do you want a discussion rather than a 1-hour monologue? That's also fine. A talk you're excited about will always be better than a talk that you don't care about. And there is an audience for every style of talk. Also, you can play around with those elements and find out what presentation style you prefer. It doesn't have to be perfect in the beginning. In fact, you shouldn't strive for perfection at all. Just give it your best and everything will be fine. And this, I think, is very important. Talk about your ideas. I can't tell you how often I had an idea and I talked myself out of it. It's only once I started talking about my ideas that I got some great feedback and encouragement. Others might also have a different viewpoint you can include in your talk, or they might know if there's already something similar out there. So talk about your ideas and gather some feedback and don't talk yourself out of it. And lastly, relax. Speaking might look intimidating and speakers might look like they know everything, but they are just normal people like you and me. Speaking is a skill and you learn and improve by doing it. So here's a summary of everything I just said. I hope you find something useful in it, and you can take a screenshot here at this point if you want to. So just to summarize, what are you working on? Which libraries are you using or writing? Which open source projects are you using or working on? Which questions, problems, or challenges have you or someone in your team encountered? Consider talking about the basics. Don't assume everyone knows what you know. Talk about the things that you are excited about. Take your time to find your presentation style. Talk about your ideas and get some feedback. And in the end, relax and have fun. So all I can say is you can do it, try it out, you might like it, and I'm looking forward to see a lot of new speakers. Thank you.
Unmute myself. So thank you, Tina. Next is Kevlin Henney.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics of the talk itself. And so the reason that there is a slide here showing the Niagara Falls is I want to talk about controlling your flow. And this whole idea of controlling your flow actually will influence the very structure and the content of your talk. And you've got to kind of look at the talk as being, as it were, a journey or a river. And this idea is particularly helpful if you are nervous or if you have a lot to get through. This applies to if you're doing a 5-minute talk or you find yourself doing a half-day session. Having this kind of idea is a kind of fundamental idea, and we would like it to be less than turbulent, as we've got in this particular slide. So my name's Kevlin Henney. You can find me all over the place, especially since the fragmentation of social media. I'm an independent consultant based in the UK. I do a lot of training and workshops and bits of coding and bits of writing. I do a lot of talks, and you can actually find me in a number of different places online, to the point that there are pictures of me doing talks. But I want to start off with one aspect that I think for a lot of people is particularly concerning. And picking a very nice little quote here from Richard O. Smith, and this is going to be universally true, not specific to the UK, but this is cited in that context. Year after year in the UK, glossophobia claims a top spot as Britain's #1 phobia, repeatedly knocking fear of death down into second position. Glossophobia is the fear of speaking. In other words, at a funeral, the average Briton would rather be in the casket than deliver the eulogy. And this is going to cramp a lot of people's style. This is, if you are nervous, and you have every right to be nervous getting up on stage or just projecting your screen and with an awareness that there is an audience out there. There is this, so basically you want to have everything as clear in your mind as possible. And there are a number of different things that are going to help you with this. But the first thing to realize is to borrow from the wisdom of the Stoics. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. But the other thing is always be very cautious. What you need to look out for is the techniques and tips that lots of people will offer, myself and the other speakers this evening. Do not take these necessarily as rules, although there is one rule I always pass on to people when they start out. If you're showing code, use a bigger font. And they say, how big? I don't know. Whatever you're thinking, make it bigger. That always seems to be a constant piece of advice. But pretty much for everything else, you need to think about it as what we're offering is a set of tools. You need to find the ones that work for you. These are not guidelines that are mandates. These are not rules. To quote Monty Python, you are all individuals. Yes, we're all individuals. You're all different. Yes, we're all different. I'm not. You're that person. You are the person who is the outlier. And so part of the trick to giving a talk and finding your flow. And let me be very clear. When I say you want to find your flow, the flow is that feeling where you kind of stop thinking about the fact that you're giving a talk. You get into your topic, and that's where you want to be. What are the tricks you need to do to get to that place? Now, there's a number of different things. So I will acknowledge the differences in terms of how people work with this. And you need to work out who you are. Some people like to script out everything. Okay. So one of the most interesting things you can do is if you're at a conference or in a situation where you have a number of people who have differing levels of experience, they don't need look for people with different experience. When you are in that situation, ask questions of them and you find out what kind of person they are. You will find some people like to script their talk out. Other people like to prepare and work with high-level notes. Other people like to let the talk emerge organically as they're putting the slides together, but also in their delivery. Okay, they kind of let it happen. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to do that, how you can do that. So you've got to figure out which one you are. There are many options. So it's almost like you're looking for a good fit. What is the kind of speaker that you are? And obviously, when you're starting out, you don't necessarily know, but there are some things that will probably inspire more fear within you than not. And if the idea of practicing something makes sense to you, then do it. Because you might say, but I don't know if it's going to make any difference. It's going to make a difference because you just said it would. If you say that feels like a good idea, go with it. Okay, that's going to help you find your flow. You need to establish the bigger picture, the goal, the narrative. So you've got information. You've found your passion, whatever it is that you're going to talk about. There's a message there. There should be a point. You also have a timeline. But a way of thinking about it is also to recognize that it is a story. Okay, there is a story to be told. You remember stories, either you tell them to your kids or you remember having stories told to you. A story has a kind of logical structure that fits together. That helps you find your flow. Once you're in that flow, it becomes easier. If your story is not really a story, but a disjoint set of pieces, and you feel that you're throwing them together, hoping that something's going to come out, maybe something will, but maybe something won't. You need to find that thread that is going to work through them. It is a journey. You're taking people from one place to another. Simultaneously, it is a place. People are spending their time. It's a store. You're hoping to offer goods to them. And that other aspect to appreciate, that a talk is indeed very much like a TARDIS. It is bigger on the inside. And that becomes a kind of a sort of principal consideration. So let's talk about talk structure for a moment. Is your talk a tree? What do I mean by a tree? If your talk is a tree, I mean that it's hierarchical. That's how you've thought about it. And in your head, you probably have sections and you have a hierarchical structuring. You're a developer. This is incredibly natural to you. The danger is, though, you can end up with a very full tree. You can end up with so many points that you have to cover absolutely all of them. And you are compelled to cover them. Now, if it turns out that you're short of time, if you actually have an abundance of time, that's great. People find that their ability to land the talk at the right length is unpredictable. This is sometimes why practice helps, but sometimes people find that they practice at a different pace to their colleagues or at a mirror. If your talk is a tree, I'm going to suggest that you don't necessarily present it as such. It is very tempting, unless you are kind of running a half day or a full day kind of session, where you have a lot more luxury of time, but also the confidence of people in the room. If you're doing something shorter, you don't necessarily have that kind of communication. So what I mean by presenting as a tree and being very careful with this is you can end up killing people with bullets. Okay. Those are a natural hierarchical translation. You're thinking, oh, this is org mode. This is how I think. And sure, but that's not necessarily what you want to present. How you take people through those has to feel like a timeline, not a tree, not a hierarchy. Don't overcommit yourself. Don't show too much of the tree up front. If you have one of the worst things you can end up doing is saying, I have 7 sections, and suddenly you run out of time and you only have 5 sections that you've got through. As a general point, I would also advise against, and I am keenly aware that I violate this guideline on a frequent basis, and I often regret doing so. Don't put numbers in the title of your talk. And what do I mean by that? Don't say, here are 10 tips, if you can possibly avoid it, particularly if you are starting out. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because you can't manage your time, and therefore you cannot manage your pace. You cannot adjust your pace accordingly or easily. If you've got a 40-minute talk and you're at minute, and you've said, I'm going to cover 10 items, that's 4 items per 4 minutes per item. You need to understand your own velocity. You need to understand your slide velocity and your item velocity. And you may find that there are points of particular interest, and you realize there you are, minute 35, and you have covered 5 out of 10. That now leaves you with 1 minute per item. You're not going to do that, and you're going to shortchange the audience. So hard-coded literals, do try and avoid them. When you're dealing with the tree, try and figure it at a high level. And I know that sometimes people like to have a kind of journey. And the journey idea is, I will show you, I'm going to cover, here are 5 topics. Perhaps you haven't put those in the title. Well done. But here's the structure of my talk. And I show you that. And I will let you know where we are in that. And basically, you're telling people it's a journey. It's a destination. We've got a journey that we're going to go through. And I'm going to visit different destinations. I think that's a great metaphor. But be very careful with that structure if you're not confident on the timing and the pace. Because the thing I always tell people is you need to plan to leave something out. The question you need to ask yourself is, what is it that I can drop if I run out of time? If I'm pushed for time, what can I drop? Similarly, if I am ahead of time, what can I spend more time on? So in essence, take people on a journey, but build it. Don't give them the whole map up front, except in a very abstract way. Here's what I'm going to talk about. You don't have to give them section structures and show them. You can have section markers. But the idea that you can miss out a section should be easy. What are the sections you can miss out on? So this kind of leads us into the idea of what we're going to think of in terms of pacing and time. Where does the time matter? What is the kind of time you need to be aware of? Topic time. Slide velocity. Now, this is something that I stumbled across very early on in my speaking career, is work out, particularly for longer talks. It's a little harder sometimes with lightning talks, and it's a little less relevant with workshops, because then it's actually about much more the material as opposed to the slides. It's less about the talk in that sense. But the idea of what is your typical slide velocity, I can't tell you what that is. I found that years ago with bulleted slides, I had roughly one slide every 3 minutes. These days, my slide velocity is typically about 1 a minute or faster, because I now put few points. I tend not to use bullets as a rule. And the idea is understand what your typical velocity is. If you've given a talk before, understand the bits where you slow down. The things that can actually mess with your pace are some slightly curious things. One of them is a demo. If you do demos, honestly, I'd always suggest to people, try and avoid doing demos. People often say in show business, never work with children or animals. I would extend that a step further. Try not to do live demos unless you've got luxury of time. In other words, you're doing a workshop and you've got plenty of time, you have everybody's patience. But if you're confined to something like 45 minutes, an hour or whatever, that is going to be problematic. Particularly, you might think you're typing really fast. Somebody in the audience is not going to see that. They're going to see you typing. Typing is still typing. It's not interesting. To do it well, you also have to be talking over it. You actually need to be producing code about 50% to 100% faster than you actually are if you're a fast typist. The other problem we also have is things like auto-completion, which actually, when you are doing that, is massively distracting. So this is a contradiction in one sense. We say, well, this is really helpful. I'm watching you do that. That's messing with my interpretation. You're messing with the reader's flow or the watcher's flow. So be very, very careful with that. These tools that normally help us and we normally think we're doing fine with, be careful. Use pre-prepared examples if you, where possible. Do fragments of demo if you really feel the need for a demo, but have different starting points. Don't need to connect the starting points. Have pre-prepared things ready to show people that require absolutely minimal additional development. Alternatively, do all this in advance. Either record yourself and speed it up to the appropriate speed, and therefore you're narrating and you have all the time and the confidence. You're not stressing yourself with that. Alternatively, take the code, put it on the slides, and there you get to direct people's attention. You're not showing them your IDE, which is honestly, it's however you set up your IDE, I'm sure you've done a wonderful job. It's a mess. If you're presenting it, it's a mess. It's not, what presents well is not the same as what we experience in the audience. So these are things that are going to mess with your time, your perception of time, but also other people's perception of time. And they can also go wrong. Network demos or anything relying on anything on the net, on the internet, is reliably going to go wrong at some point. So you want to be in control of all of the elements of your talk. That is going to give you some kind of confidence and some kind of pace. So that brings us kind of to a couple of closing comments. This is the kind of flow we want to avoid. In addition to helping you with understand your own flow, the other piece of advice, this is the flow that you actually want. The other piece of advice I would offer you on this one is when you are presenting, do not just present your screen. Set up where possible, use a presenter view. The presenter view gives you complete control. You're sharing a second screen. You're projecting to a second screen. This works from home or when you are live in person somewhere. It allows you to control your time. Normally there is a clock in the presenter view. Make sure, in addition, that you have clocks around you so you can navigate your pace. So a phone is obviously a very good example. If you're in your own place, you know where to look. If you are in a public place, if you're in a speaking, some kind of conference, check out in advance whether or not they've got clocks. If they don't, make sure that you put your one nearby so you can see it. But the other thing with the presenter view is it also allows you to navigate and skip through your talk. It allows you to skip slides and nobody knows. So there's that idea of you've created a journey. Maybe there are 10 parts to your journey and you've already identified 2 or 3 of them as potentially optional. You might skip them if you have time. Nobody knows that you're slipping past that in order to do time. But should you realize you have more time, you can go back to them, which is just another minor point on slide construction. Never number your slides. because people can then see when you're doing that. The point is you're offering people a journey. You're offering them an experience. Their flow is just as important as your flow. So on that, I will wrap up with a wonderful piece of advice from the Queens of the Stone Age. Go with the flow.
That is a very good advice. Thank you, Kevlin. Let's see, I need to advance my slides actually. So here we are. Now next, actually, if you don't want to follow Kevlin's advice on live demos, you probably should follow the advice from Chandler Carruth, who has given a live demo.
We saw a nice lightning talk about having good code samples and slides, and we saw a live demo of how to actually build those slides. Now it's time to have a live demo about live demos. I like meta, and so I figured this would be a fun way to do this. So here we're gonna kind of go through and do a little bit of a live demo. So what are we actually talking about? What are live demos even good for doing? So the first thing that I think about with a live demo is it's really good for zooming in on some topic, right? This is a way to engage the audience, right? Something you can show practical, real tools that you want people to use. It's really great for showing very specific code or specific details of something that's fairly complex. It's good at focusing on how, much more than why. And that means that there's also something that live demos are not really good at, and this is kind of zooming out, right? You don't want to try and step back or really get to the bigger picture with the live demo. Kind of, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't engage the audience very well. It's hard to get people to focus on what or especially why you're saying something when you're doing a live demo. They're reading the demo, right? And so if you want to kind of highlight your perspective or focus on an interpretation, a live demo doesn't tend to be the best thing. Right, so let's look at how we actually want to do a live demo. First thing you have to do is you have to plan every single step. This is hard to do, but it's really, really, really important, right? How do you actually get into the live demo? How do you move from one step to the next step? How does everything work while you're doing this? You want a good plan from the beginning. Another thing to think about is how do you wrap up the live demo and go back to your slides? This is super, super important. If you have a live demo that you're mixing into the rest of a talk. And I'm curious, everybody should think about how many pages of notes they think I prepared in order to be able to do, a 7-minute lightning talk on this. I think this is going to be kind of interesting to see, and we'll actually look at the notes I have later. If you have your plan, what are the kind of key components of making your live demo a success? The first thing to think about is you've got to work within the projector and the audience view. You can't be trying to make the projector, the audience, look at your live demo the way you would while you're working at a desk with a big monitor. You have to go the other direction, right? Put yourself into the shoes of having a low resolution, terrible projector with bad lighting, right? And so I've zoomed all the way in, and this is actually the view that I'm looking at, right? I'm looking at the same thing you're seeing here. And it's important that you kind of learn how to work in that environment and feel comfortable working in that environment. You also have to learn the tools you're going to be presenting. You've got to know them really, really well, much better than you need to actually just use them day to day. And you got to know how to make them work for the demo. If you're going to use Visual Studio Code or an IDE, you need to be able to just jump right into it, pull things up, move around, right? If you want to show a preview, you have to know where it's going to come up. When it doesn't fit easily on the screen, you got to know how to fix that, how to rearrange everything so that you get the view that you want to show the audience, right? I'm a big fan of virtual desktops for live demo. It lets you kind of move between different tools in a way that's pretty smooth. You always have the same layout, the exact thing you're expecting each time you look at it. You want to find this tooling workflow that's going to be effective when you're demoing it live. Next, you have to make this feel real to the audience, right? You don't want to do something that's just going to oversimplify it, right? It's tempting to oversimplify it. In slide code, you don't have to make it compile, but when you're actually doing a live demo, you need stuff to compile. You need it to work with the real tools, and that's really hard. And so, actually use stuff here. And so I'm actually using, I have my editor set up. It does automatic formatting of my markdown here. You want to try and make it real so that people actually see how things work. The next thing is that you do want to make this live in the moment. So you'll see me make mistakes here, right? And that's fine. It's good to actually have some mistakes that you have to correct live, right? And then people can kind of see that, no, this is actually real. It's actually happening live, and it keeps them engaged. The other thing is to never, ever stop talking. And this is, I think, the hardest thing about a live demo. It's especially hard when you're going to actually talk about something that you're not currently typing. And when you're trying to do this, it's very hard to keep it in your head what you're trying to say and what you're trying to type. And you'll notice a technique I'm using here, which is I'm alternating. And so I'll type a word and I'll say a word, and I'll type a word and I'll say a word. It's really hard for your brain to handle text in two different streams. And so have a plan for how to do that and how to make it through it. This is also one of the weird times when things like and hesitations, that's actually fine when you're live demoing, because what you want to do is keep the audience engaged while you have time to make it through your live demo. Next, make it fast and comfortable. One thing you'll notice is that I move fast in a live demo. I move really, really fast. And that's because people can easily get bogged down in the live demo. And so you've got to rush just a little bit. But of course, you can't go too fast or it'll lose people. It's a hard balance to strike. And so I don't have a perfect advice here, but it's something you've just got to do. All right. Next up, okay, I said to plan, scratch all of that. It's not actually about planning. It's about practice. I mean, you need some plans. Without a plan, you can do a great live demo with a minimal plan, but you have to practice, right? You have to make it comfortable and fast. And you don't move this, like a lot of people have talked to me after a live demo and they're like, how do you type that fast? By typing the same thing over and over and over again. I don't normally type this fast, but you got to practice it until you're comfortable and you're fast and you can keep the audience moving. And you have to practice things going wrong. And so you don't get locked into this rigid script. So let things go wrong, mess up intentionally, accidents happen, that's fine. You want to kind of get that full experience when you're practicing. All right. The last thing is you've got to cheat. Sometimes you're going to be doing like, I forgot what I'm supposed to type. That's fine. Just have something prepared ahead of time, right? Just pull out a prepared selection of things really fast. This is not a big deal, right? People actually are fine with it. They know things are going to go wrong. The key for you as the presenter is to just roll with it, right? Have those canned bits, catch back up. You can even use a pre-filled framework, kind of like what I'm using here, to move yourself through each step of what you want to present. Things do go wrong. Last but not least, you should really be honest and provide your source. This is actually one of my big mistakes that I've made in a lot of talks, is that I don't always kind of upload the source, provide people access to it. This hurts two things, both the credibility. It's really hard for people to believe live demo if they can't reproduce it, but it also hurts accessibility. Like it's nice that I have decent contrast and a big font, but even better is to actually have a Git repository that people can go and check out and correct whatever they've misread. I understand like uploading can be hard. This is actually my problem, is that, if you work for a company and you have to like sort out licenses or something, but I really encourage everyone, try to do this. I'm actually going to try and get this uploaded on my GitHub page just so that I actually have done this yet, but I couldn't get it ready before the talk. But try and actually provide a link to things. It's so helpful if you're doing a live demo to then kind of show all of the inputs so that people can see them. And so with that, I do want to just show you what kind of notes went into the planning for this, right? And so these are all of the notes that I was taking to myself in my initial run through, trying to plan out every step of what I want to do, okay? Hundreds of lines of notes went into a 7-8 minute talk. And so with that, I've done a live demo, and I hope this helps you all do your next live demo, because I think it's a really fun way to engage audiences.
Jens, you're on mute.
See, now you see that it's live.
It's authentic. That's what we want.
Exactly.
Thanks, Chandler. That was really great live demo on doing live demos. So now you can choose what you want to do. I wanted to say that you probably noticed that Diego dropped out, and thanks for coming, Diego. Unfortunately, he's not on the panel later, but he really gave a great talk, and so I'm glad he made time for that, but then now he had to head off to meet with someone else, I guess, or something. Anyways, next is Victor Ciura. And thank you, Victor, for your talk. But actually, let me get your slides up. Here we are.
Am I ready to go?
Okay, let's go.
Yeah. Hey, folks. Thanks, Jens, for inviting me. It's been a while since I've done one of these online things. Very much pandemic vibes, but I'm happy to do it. So when I started to sort of prepare for this presentation, I actually had to go back and look and see when did I start doing presentations at international conferences. And I was a bit surprised that I've done this now for over 10 years. And I must say that it on some level is surprising. Right? Time flies, right? And in some ways, I feel much more confident when I prepare a presentation now. When I get very, very excited to actually present at a conference, and at the same time, I realize that I'm learning so much each year, and with each conference, and with each iteration of a particular presentation that I might be doing at different conferences, like from iteration to iteration, from year to year. I feel like I'm progressing so much, as if I'm a sort of just beginning, just learning. So I'm very much, it is a learning journey for me, and I'm learning from a lot of great folks. By the way, this is like a mandatory slide, places and projects where I've done some damage in the past or currently. So I want to start this talk by telling you that you are not this guy, right? And don't even try, right? There are presenters who are sort of more than just presenters at technical conferences. They're sort of the combination of great engineers and stand-up comedians and great entertainers, right? You can definitely enjoy the experience, and I sort of always wanted to get to that level, but you don't have to do that. So you can be a very good technical presenter, and you can very much enjoy the experience and have the audience be very engaged and feel that they like watching your presentations without needing to be Alex Andrescu level presenter. And trust me, I've tried. Like a few years back at CPPCon, I think, a few years back, there was a workshop about technical speaking. It was called Engage, Entertain, Educate. And I actually, when I saw this workshop, I immediately signed up and I said, oh, I want to learn. And this was in 2018. These were the workshop mentors, trainers. And I immediately signed up, and I was like, I wanna learn from these folks, right? I wanna aspire to that level. And it was an amazing experience. So much so that I signed up the second year where they did the same workshop, and I signed up the second time, like where people were asking me, like, weren't you here like last year? Like, so it was an amazing experience. Too bad it's not happening as of late. I wish they would bring this kind of thing back, so that you learn from these experiences, and it was amazing. But you might have your sort of mentors, idols, or people that you sort of aspire to be like, but you don't have to be there. You can be a perfectly good presenter without the need to be a superstar level presenter. So my promise here to you is that I'm going to share what I learned from advice, from these kinds of trainings, from watching others, from mistakes that I've done. So I'm going to try to give you like a sneak peek in my personal toolbox of things that I know, things that I've tried, things that I failed at, and things that I found out that work great. So and it was sort of an interesting challenge because I liked that this format was sort of a lightning format for short talk, because it really pushed me, it really forced me to think hard and distill what I consider to be essentials, because there's so many things that you can talk about on this meta level. You can talk about slides, you can talk about preparing, and we've seen already there's a nice, Jens already gathered like a very nice collection of these meta talks about presenting, about preparing, about building your slides, about composition, about ending a talk, about do's and don'ts, and all sorts of advice. And we've seen even tonight exceptional advice. So it really forced me to, this short format forced me to think what I feel like made the biggest difference for me. And I'm not saying I reached the level where I feel like, I'm super happy with how I do it. But I feel like these kinds of things that I sort of try to synthesize here in a couple of slides really made a difference for me. So I'm going to try to share that with you. So I'm hoping that at least you'll get, after these 5-10 minutes with me, you'll get sort of my essentials, my toolbox. So I liked when Kevlin earlier talked about killing people with bullets. So I have like a ton of bullets. So get your vests on. So I would say, if I had time, I would have removed them just to please Kevlin, but I didn't. So here come the bullets, Kevlin. So I would say start your presentation with the promise up front. So you need to find something to tease out the audience. You need to show a cool preview. You need to sort of make an outlandish claim. You need to make a bold statement. You need to do some, I don't know, interesting reveal. You need to do something upfront so that people know why they should listen to you for the next minutes or so. So promise what they'll get out of it, show a teaser, show something to whet their appetite, and be really passionate about it. They really need to see. The topic might not be that interesting, but if you show real passion about it, might be like super niche, super like narrow interest kind of thing, or super nerdy thing, super nerdy detail, or it might be something like universally applicable. But some advanced users might consider that it's, this is such a entry level thing. Why should I bother? But if you express real passion about it, if they see like enormous energy from you coming about it, they sort of they will be on the edge of their seats to see, why are they so passionate? Why are they so energetic about this topic? To me, it seems like, just like regular run of the mill technical topic. Like, why is he so passionate about it, right? Now I'm curious, right? So it's important to frame your idea, to put it in context. Like when you're dropping someone in the middle of, let me walk you through this nice library or this technique that I developed, and if you're assuming that your audience is with you, or has been with you, or has the same kind of background, or has faced the same kind of challenges and problems that you had, and it's not necessarily true. So you need to set a context, you need to set a frame, so that people can identify your idea or your technique or the stuff that you're about to present. They need to see it in context, they need to understand, and you need to set up the status quo. They need to understand what's the custom wisdom, what's the mainstream technique, what are the mainstream, I don't know, solutions, libraries, the common patterns, common idioms around this thing that you're about to say, right? They need to understand, because not everyone might know what the status quo is, or they might have an outdated picture of what's going on for a couple of years. Maybe things have moved along. So you need to sort of try to bring everyone along to sort of align at the start. And you need to make a case of why this is important. Like, why are you bothering talking about this? Why are you wasting time preparing for this thing? Why have you wasted time sort of investigating, building, I don't know, benchmarking or whatever? And why should they attend this presentation? And you need to sort of make a case for the motivation behind solving this problem, or coming up with that technique or that library, or that or explaining that new concept in the new standard of the language, and so on. And it can be a universal motivation, or the motivation of a group of people, might be like a vertical or niche kind of thing, or special audience. But I would say it's even more important if it's your motivation. So it's very important to sort of make it personal. Why did I get involved into this? What made me go this rabbit hole? Why do I feel the need to explain or to teach about this new concept in the, I don't know, C++ 37? I need to sort of explain why I care and what was my motivation going into this thing, so that people can relate to you and to the topic. And some ingredients that I found that really help. And I think that I connect excellently here with what Kevlin said earlier with the flow and when some of the ideas. And Kevlin actually very nicely punctuated the importance of the story and how that helps people absorb the information and persuades them. Humans are very much creatures of stories. Like, this is what makes us unique. The fact that we attach meaning to stories, we convey information through stories and through events, and how we connect them. And this is how we remember stuff. For example, the most memorable presentations, technical presentations I've been involved with, have had some interesting stories behind them. And I'm not talking like metaphors or invented follow me on this journey kind of thing. No, they might relate like an interesting challenge that team or that person faced, or might tell some story about how investigating the issues revealed some other interesting side effect or byproduct, or how pursuing some rabbit hole or doing some kind of yak shaving and investigation, some interesting reveal happened, and some new insights were discovered, or how a project benefited from some interesting new technique or library. So and the stories can have personal touches, can reveal failures, can reveal learning moments. I would say memorable stories are most interesting when they reveal failures, or maybe post-mortem investigations that were really interesting, or the confluence of some really interesting events that happened by chance to sort of synchronize and cause some unexpected side effect that it was interesting to investigate and sort of figure out how to deal with, to solve. And connected here to this story element is the element of surprise. It's super helpful when you can sneak in an interesting, unexpected thing in your story. Like when you can say, oh, while we were investigating, or we were benchmarking this, or we were trying to figure out what caused that problem, an unexpected thing happened. Like we discovered that the underlying issue was not at all what we thought. It was not at all what connected with the thing that we were modifying, like this kind of butterfly effect, or 7 levels of indirection kind of spooky action at a distance kind of effects, or surprising disappointment. Like we implemented the smartest, most fanciest hash implementation or hash container, and we measured it, and it was twice as slow as the standard one. And we were all bummed and disappointed that we spent 2 months investigating why it was so slow. And then you come with a reveal of the learning from that experience. Like the element of surprise is, even if it's a fail, it's more memorable and it has bigger impact on the learning and experience of the audience than just walking them through this is how the library works, and trust us, it took us years to get to this level and it's good now. No, tell them why, tell them all the failures along the way. And they need to take away the salient idea. They need to understand from all the things that you present, like what's the takeaway? What's the most important thing? Like if I should remember just 2 things out of an hour talk, what those 2 things should be. So let them leave with the salient idea of all your rambling. And to help with that, I see successful speakers sort of have these sort of sneaky tools, like they would either sneak in some tokens or catchphrases, or they might invent some moniker, or they might do some clever pun associations, or some clever thing or some clever imagery that would, for example, now I will forever associate talking and flow of a presentation with canals in, I don't know, Copenhagen or Amsterdam, because I've just seen Kevlin show some nice pictures of those, and I will forever associate it like a rushed presentation with a Niagara Falls, right? And getting drenched. So sneaking in these kinds of monikers, these kinds of tokens and associations would make people remember and stuff from your talk. They might not remember the whole thing. They might not even remember the subject, but they will remember these tokens that you sneak in the presentation. So this is sort of cheat sheet kind of things that you can sneak in your presentation to make it memorable. So, and when you talk about sort of delivering on your idea, think about what's different and put an accent on what's different. Build a fence around the idea. This expression is not mine, by the way. I'm going to reveal from where it is. So build a fence around your idea. My method, my idea is different from XYZ because, and highlight the differences. My method is similar to XYZ, but here's what I did differently. Here's what we tried and worked better. Like try to contrast as much as possible. Don't try to sort of build, spend an enormous time explaining some mainstream thing and, when we did this differently. No, highlight what's different. And keep contrasting. Keep this sort of like contrast to existing know-how, existing method, existing knowledge. Keep always contrast, always compare, so that people understand what's the original part, right? Because otherwise they will get confused. What do you bring novel? Like avoid people being confused about what's novel in what you're presenting. Are you presenting something that everyone knows? Are you presenting existing wisdom or techniques? What's different? What are you presenting novel here, right? And because I've spoke really fast up until now, and I now need to tell you all that you need to really go slow. And I think Kevlin made this point like at length about rhythm and how you should go about delivering on and pacing your talk. So I won't go into details there, but I will point out cycling. I believe that cycling through a presentation, especially like a long format presentation, like 45, 90 minutes, 60 minutes, it's important to cycle back and repeat things in different ways so that different people understand them on their own terms. So same kind of difference, same kind of ideas, sort of put it along the presentation, put it in different formats, in different settings, in different examples, 2 or 3 times, so that you can make it hit home in different ways, because not everyone will understand it in the same way. So you need to sort of have this sort of repeat and cycling back to get everyone. And make pauses, especially if you have like structured presentation and sort of natural stopping points, and not just to take questions, but to let people sort of get back on track. And I want to say here, like, don't lose anyone, right? Don't lose too many people during the presentation, right? Pause, use verbal punctuations so that people can have some natural anchor points, like have maybe an agenda so that people know what to expect, or some checkpoints so that they know where you are, right? Enumerations help. Kevlin earlier mentioned about not numbering them, but you can have these anchor points so that they know what you're talking about. Maybe they just, for a second, they misplaced their attention, and they look back up and they lost you because you went 2-3 slides and, oh, what is he talking about now? Like, so have them an ability to get back on the bus, help them have these anchor points where you sort of get them back in, like, oh, if people are lost, this is where we now synchronize to move together to the next section or to the next idea. So have these sort of natural moments where you sort of try to have barriers as synchronization points. And you can use questions for that. And usually people expect that only audience asks questions. You can ask questions along the way. And this can be one of the techniques that you can use to get people back on the track. You can focus, engage or re-engage the audience if you ask them a couple of questions. Of course, this works better in a live environment, not necessarily how it is now, for example, online. But you need to be very careful here. Like if you ask trivial questions, people would be embarrassed to raise their hands or to get involved, or they might feel that it's a trick question because it's too easy, right? At the same time, if it's too hard of a question, you'll get no answers, right? Or you'll get some wrong answer and that person will be embarrassed. So you need to be sort of careful how you plan these things. Don't just wing them. And the waiting is also important here. Like if you if you wait too long, it's awkward. If you don't wait enough, like people will maybe don't have a chance to raise their hands or don't make up the nerve to raise their hands or whatever. So you need to pace yourself, right? And when you're presenting live, waiting 5 seconds, 7 seconds seems like an eternity when you're waiting for that answer or that raised hand. But you need to sort of try to do a judgment call here. So try to gauge that. And reward engagement. And by that, I don't mean throwing candy in the audience when they get the question right or giving them a book or whatever. Oh, sure, that works. But I would say rewarding engagement is more, for example, highlighting an interesting new way of thinking or an interesting answer that you didn't expect but you find valuable, or highlight the fact that, oh, your answer actually reminded me to talk about X or Y, or sort of make that person that raised their hand and answer the question feel that they contributed to your story, so that others feel more empowered to do so, right? So reward engagement. And I mentioned a bunch of these nice things that I put in my toolbox, and I would say a lot of them came from Patrick Winston. And if you folks don't know who Patrick Winston I put a link here to this presentation that I highly encourage you to see. It's about speaking in general, in multiple settings, not just presentations at conferences, all kinds of presentations. And of course, but I already see that Jens took care of that. But just in case Jens wasn't prepared to show Kate's presentation and how to end the talk, I just put a reference here because it's just so good, and I had to end somehow. So that's it for me.
All right. I want to thank you, Victor. That was really a great lightning talk. Now it's my turn. We will have Kate Gregory, and already spoiled what she will be talking about, but I would like to quickly talk today about the counterpart on how to start a talk. And as this is a lightning talk, I cannot fully cover the topic. You know, there's lots of things to do during the talk, etc., etc. But I see how you start your talks at Meeting C++, because I do, edit the videos, and this kind of, shows me how you start, what was before, and that's kind of the stuff I want to talk about. So some feedback and tips from my perspective. Before you start, do a tech check. And as we are often now streaming talks, and this will be the case when you speak on site and meeting C++, make sure that the talk is live streamed, especially like if you're the first speaker in the day, which is in that room. Actually, unfortunately, it happened to us last year that the speaker had the break screen on during starting his talk. And after 15 minutes or a little bit more, the person on the media pult managed to actually, bring up the live view. I'm very happy that it only happened to one speaker, but that's the other point. Like if you start your talk, make sure that the technical people, etc., know that you're starting your talk, and don't just start your talk because you think it's time. Always start on time so that everybody is in the room and you don't, have to start again. And then there's a pre-talk, which I already hinted at. The time when you're set up and you're still killing some time. Some folks, not everyone has to do that, but a lot of folks like to banter with the audience. And some people just are on their phone, reading, checking the room, doing stuff. Some people do troubleshooting because they have some technical issues, but that's gotten rather rare nowadays. If you're not like using the standard equipment like a laptop to present from, make sure to check that before your talk basically is ready to go. Also, kind of the pre-talk is like an ideal time to, announce your talk and say, this is the room where you are talking about your talk. And people normally then will leave and say, well, I didn't want to go to the next talk. And that's just normal. Some other people will come in and replace them. But it's far better than when you start your talk and people start leaving. That's not so good. So the big one thing I want to talk about is don't mix all of this, what we talked about, that you do before your talk with the start of your talk. I see a lot of people which basically are in the flow with bantering, and out of this flow, they start their talk with the next or mid-sentence. They're like, and now we're going ahead. And I see some people starting their talk, telling the title, and then doing bantering, and then continuing with their talk. I do think that for you, it's really important to take a break and make a distinction before the time that is before your talk and when you actually start your talk. Because this is now very important for you, and also like the video editor later doesn't have to, try to cut it in a way that your talk online actually is the start of your talk and not like starts with an awkward sentence and then this can be really hard to cut. So take a break and then start your talk. But, how do you start your talk? So the first 30 to 120 seconds count. This is true online, but this is also true because you're speaking to your on-site audience, right? This is a time for you to capture their interest in your talk. And online, it's very normal that the interest drops off and that 70% of the audience is not watching more than 5 minutes. This is very normal and just happens to everyone actually here. This is our 3 speakers, Diego, Kevlin, and Victor. And every other talk looks similarly. But for the first 30 seconds and like the first 2 minutes, that's basically what YouTube measures. And so you really have to try to give your best in this time frame. And so that is why there's a window of interest, which is 30 seconds to get folks interested in watching your talk. So make this your talk intro. And when we talk about structure, I think a good structure on how you, especially as a new speaker, should start your talk is have a title slide, of course. Then go on in an overview agenda of your talk. This can be one slide, this can be multiple slides, followed by your motivation. And then, and for some people this is optional, have an about me slide and an employer slide. I do understand that some people need to have an employer slide because that's just how they get to the conference, and that's a required and mandatory slide. So in no way I can tell you not to have a slide. And I understand it's mandatory to you. Or maybe you think that your company deserves it. Fine. Introducing yourself, I think it's really important that new speakers and speakers which are not regular speakers at a conference do this. And I see the counter argument sometimes that this kind of breaks the flow, but basically you've just got people interested in your talk, and now you quickly say something about who you are. That's totally fine, and then you start your talk and continue in the flow. What I don't like so much, which I think that some people, it's kind of like the classic pattern is to have your title slide and then directly to get the introduction of yourself out of the way, you have the about me slide about your employer, and then your actual talk. And in that case, everyone that comes to your talk online will, in that time frame, only see your title slide, where you probably at the start talk a bit about what is on the title slide, and then about you. But they came for the topic, and the people in the room are probably also, especially if you're a new speaker, they are there for the topic. So capture the audience when you start speaking. Use the first minutes of your talk to engage with your audience and make them listening to you. Okay? And then introduce yourself. And I know there's some people which don't need to do that because they are famous and everybody knows who they are. If you start speaking, that's not yourself. Especially when you start speaking, there's like the people that already know you in the audience don't need an introduction, right? They're here because maybe they want to support you, maybe they're co-workers, friends, etc. But the folks which came for the topic, they don't know you. So you should quickly say, like, have a slide for that, what you do, what your background is, and then continue. And that basically is the conclusion of my talk about how to start a talk. Let's see what Kate Gregory has to say about starting a talk. No.
I'm going to talk about one tiny little thing, but I think it's an important thing, and I'll tell you why I think it's important. And it's about ending your talk. As I said, I go to a lot of talks. I like going to talks, and I'm enjoying them. They're fantastic. Someone has got diagrams and explanations of something. This is why Rotate is great. Or they have code and they're zipping along. They're talking about the future stuff that's going to happen. And then they bump into this slide and they stop talking. Or even worse, they bump into this slide. I've seen this on more than one occasion. This isn't better, right? And what happens when this slide comes up is the speaker kind of stops talking. And then sometimes they seem like it really caught them by surprise. They were in a great mood. They were cranking along. Everything was fine. And then up comes the slide that says questions or the whatever. And they go, well, I guess that's all I have. That seems to be it. And like the audience doesn't get their cue to clap. A couple people, kind of try it, but other people don't pick it up because the speaker's still talking and saying, "Oh, I seem to have time for a few questions." And so people are like, "I guess we'll clap when the questions are over." And it's like, who wrote this deck? You wrote this deck on purpose. You should know this deck, and you should have an ending that is not just, "Well, I don't seem to have any more content to say to you. A couple of people have alluded to these moments that you get in a talk. You can't count on them, but there are these moments. So one of them is the opening. There's probably another whole talk about how to start a talk. A lot of people do it badly. I like to start with the conclusion. This isn't a scientific paper where we're going to lay out all the evidence and then on the very last slide we're going to reveal the exciting conclusion. I like to actually start with the conclusion, but somehow you've got to get their attention to pay mind to what you are saying for the next however many minutes you're going to do it. And so you deliberately structure a great moment in there. And Patricia just gave us a reprise of a really life-changing talk for a lot of people, where she opened with these questions. Have you ever? And wow, that got people's attention. That got people thinking about the problem. A strong opening is amazing. If you are lucky, if the stars align, you may get a moment during a talk. Sean famously, this is a rotate. And the first time he said it, he said, this is obviously a rotate. And it was so not obvious to me that I literally looked around the room at the other people with me to make sure that I was not the only one who didn't think that was obviously a rotate at all. At Meeting C++, I had a series of bullets on a slide, and the last bullet spoke to me so much that I repeated it on a slide of its own. And when I did, I saw all the phones come up to take a picture. Is it important to your ego that you're good at a complicated language? You may have an amazing code example. You may have this really brilliant point that people are going to share on Twitter, that people are going to talk to that one sentence out of your talk over and over. You can't be sure you will have a moment like that in your talk. You can try, but you can't be sure. Even in a great talk, there might not be one. But you get your closing, right? You're guaranteed your closing. So you want to structure that closing to be one of those moments. And the most important thing about that is to end on purpose. To not just trail off, to not just say, well, I guess I must stop talking now. To have a deliberate ending. I believe that every talk should have a call to action. You don't have to label it call to action. It's not wrong if you do, but lately I've been putting, what do I want you to do at the top of the slide. If you've written a great library and you're coming to give a talk about my library is a great library, then your call to action is probably use my library. It's great. But it could be join the team to help maintain this library. You know what it is, right? Or if you've discovered a lovely technique like Claire's code highlighting technique, then the call to action is, hey, you should highlight your code, make your code easier to read on slides, and I've shown you how to do it. Sometimes someone, especially if the talk has like disaster or fiasco or whatever in the title, their call to action is the opposite. They want you to stop doing something. And you don't need to hide this. This is the point. This is why you came to talk for 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 60 or 90 minutes, so that people would start doing a thing. So take some time and figure out what that is that you want. But then you should also have a closing sentence. You're going to signal that you're done. And there's several parts to this. One is your actual sentence, which I'll talk about in a minute. But there's also a particular inflection, a particular rhythm of your words that says, I've reached the end of the sentence, I've reached the end of the paragraph, I've reached the end of the chapter, and they all lived happily ever after. That rhythm, we recognize it immediately. It's a little more pauses between the words and a little kind of down drop. Everybody knows that's the end thing. So after you say your closing sentence, you pause for a couple of beats, and then you say, thank you. Believe me, they will applaud. That is, everybody knows the cue. There's a script. When you do that and then you say, thank you, they all go, yay. Even if you weren't really that good, they're still going to do that, okay, for sure, because they now know they're done. Now you can put the resources up behind you, or you can put the questions up, slide, Q&A, whatever, something like that for them to look at while you're answering questions, because you don't necessarily want to be sitting on your call to action slide. Don't read it out. Don't say, so I have a blog, it's here, and you can see that I'm sometimes on Twitter and da-da-da. Just Just leave it there. Maybe say, here's some resources that you might find helpful. But let's come back to that closing sentence. And that is why everybody should whatever it is you think everybody should. So please join me in doing something or another more often, or no longer doing something, or whatever, you want them to do something. So please join me in doing that, right? So you see, you really can, whatever it is. But one of my tricks, which is working pretty well for me, is to have a talk that has a title that the title itself makes a good closing sentence. Then what I can do when I get to the end is I can press home, and we'll go back to the screen where the title is in great big letters along with my contact information, and everyone will know we're done. And that, my friends, is how you end a talk. Thank you.
Yes, that was really great. Here we are again. And let's go on to the slides. Thank you, Kate. That was really great talk. And now, one more thing. I, of course, need to tell you how to submit your talk to Meeting C++, right? It's kind of the point of what we did today. These are kind of the URLs for this. It's similar at other conferences. And just some of this is opinionated, so take it with a grain of salt. You need an account. And you can subscribe, of course, to the newsletter, right? The first step is creating your speaker bio. It's a short description of yourself, maybe add a picture. You can join the review group or receive email notifications on reviews. That's your choice. This box is actually where you put your bio and you can edit it. And I want to point out this symbol, this chain symbol lets you add links, which can be very helpful if you want to link your GitHub repository, your personal website, your blog, and stuff like that. Now you're ready to step 3 to submit your actual talk. Let's break this up. These are the public fields, the talk title and the talk description, which will be visible once you speak at the conference. So on the talk title, keep it short, be precise. Some people like to really include subtitles and make the title as long as they can, and I don't like that, and I will kind of, shorten it if I can, if it's too long. Try to avoid certain characters as, with programmers, so HTML entity conversion and stuff like that. Of course, exceptions are like C++ and stuff, which is mandatory. That's fine. But if you can avoid it in your title, same goes like for Unicode characters and stuff like that. Can work very wonderful, but also can just, happen that the software the conference uses doesn't really cover these. Good titles are engaging. So how we using a C++ standard for something, memes, introductions, overviews in features, libraries, etc. can be great topics to speak about. Well-known speakers get away with more things than you as a new speaker. Title can be engaging, and I think it's more important for new speakers, but just have a title that you like. That's like also kind of important, that don't submit a talk which the title you don't like. That's like a big sign to change the title. The talk description is what your talk is about. More than one paragraph. You can include code snippets with pre. It's not a blog post. Some speakers really put a lot into here, and a wall of text just basically achieves only that nobody reads it. Link to important things like your library, code, reference things. Be aware when you paste in this form, there might be copy and paste artifacts from text editors where you copied from. And this is basically where you see the HTML which you're creating. And that's also where you can turn a P element in a pre-element where you pasted your code into. The outline is basically how you envision your talk. Talk chapters, slide titles are what I often use. And what other speakers I see are often using is kind of what the people which do the voting or the review on your talk will be seeing. It's a free text felt. You can put anything and everything in there. Again, don't put too much in there. It's like, a wall of text will probably not be positive for the reviewers. But this is a part which is not public when the talk is being published that you're speaking at the conference. It's also great for ideas. The audience field below it just gives like a feeling for people at the conference if they're meant to be in that audience. And I have the beginner, intermediate, and advanced options there. Other conferences have like expert, I saw, but yeah. There's like, a lot of people in the audience or generally in our community don't think really that expert is something positive. So there's more options below that. Let's go through them. The talk premieres at Meeting C++ is the first choice. That just means that the talk is not being submitted to a different conference before Meeting C++. It's not important, but for some reason, I, of course, need to have some talks which are premiering and not just redone by speakers. If you presented your talk at CPPCon and you're coming to my conference, that's not a problem. Or if you've previously given it at a different conference or at a user group, if you practiced your talk, that's fine. But if you're only submitting this to Meeting C++ because you're a new speaker, or just generally think that, as a speaker, that, hey, that's my time slot to have a new talk ready, then let me know that I can, gives us a bit of a bump. The submission review is a way that I, actually read through your submission and tell you that there is a spelling error, or that maybe you should, how you add links and stuff. And often I see that there's a common bug that people write stuff in the outline, and sometimes then I have to tell people, hey, it would be great if you mentioned that also in your talk description, because if you actually speak about it, it would be great to let people know that, right? And that's very common. There's an option for a second speaker. It's not very common that you give talks with 2 people. That's actually the limit. I don't allow talks with more than 2 speakers. But usually you have like 1 or 2 at the conference. So if that is the case for you, bring along a second speaker. That's what you check. And that triggers the second speaker bio form, which basically lets you fill out the bio for the second speaker. Very important option is the online only option, which allows you to speak at Meeting C++ when you're not able to make it to Berlin or for other reasons. And at the moment, that is very, very few folks. So this is always a great way to get your talk accepted into the conference at the moment. Because I have an online track, which is pre-recorded, and I need to have people speak there. And so some people that are not able to come to Berlin, that is a chance for you to contribute to the conference and give your first or another talk online. There's no on-site only, because some people think that that should also be an option. No, it's not. Everyone may speak online, but it's your choice, right? So once the talks for the conference are selected, I will tell people that I may, and I probably will have still room in the online track. And if they'd like to speak on the online track, then that's the chance to volunteer for that. And the last thing, which is very important, is to submit your talk. Because if it's not submitted, then it's not going to be there. You'll be able to edit it, which I think is important to know. Not every conference allows this, but Meeting C++ allows you to edit the talk after the submission. So if you submitted the talk and the next day you think, I should maybe change the talk description, or maybe in the outline I need to, fine, happens to all of us. But the talk is in the system, even if you miss the edit. The next steps are, once the call for talks has ended, 1 week where you can edit your submission. Then the voting starts. The talk info is visible. The speaker info isn't so much. Some folks will be able to see that, but usually we want this voting to be anonymous. And then the selection for tracks is guided by the voting results. And with that, thank you for listening. Submit your talk until June 25th this year. And links you find on the conference page. And questions, if you see this online in the comments, I will answer them. And anyways, this has been now the lightning talks. Thank you. Let's get the panel started. And now's the time for you to think about the questions you want to ask the three of us. Maybe I start with a question like, I know both of you have given many talks. What has been your worst, or like, what has been like something you remember where something unusual happened when you gave a talk, and how did you deal with the situation?
Victor, you want to go?
Yeah. So you said unusual, and I think I'm trying to wind back. I think it was one time at CPPCon where I was I prepared a talk called it was about Windows COM, of all the things, right? And sort of trying to go through from prehistory to modern C++ with Windows COM. It was called something like these aren't the COM objects you're looking for, or something like that. And I was trying to sort of explain COM internals and some of the nice utilities and nice techniques that you can use in modern C++ to better deal with COM and so on. And while I was talking and trying to be clever and reveal important stuff, I noticed that in the audience there was one of the guys that I was citing in my slides, and one of the people sort of spearheading the modern COM revolution in C++ and later in Rust. So I immediately I froze. Like when I saw his face in the audience, I immediately froze, because I was like super under pressure or super embarrassed, both because I had his name and face on one of my slides, and because I was trying to preach something and sort of he was the expert in the audience. So I immediately sort of lost my cool, and I sort of I felt like an eternity, at least internally. And later I watched the video recording and it wasn't that bad, but in the moment it felt like, oh my god, I'm losing track of this presentation. Like I felt like I was like spacing out for 20 minutes, but it was probably 2.5 seconds. So it felt like so this happens when you sort of get one of these audience interactions, or you get one of these insights, or maybe a question, but in this case it was just citing his face in the audience that really threw my rhythm and sort of derailed my whole sort of confidence after that, and it was like mid through the talk. So fortunately I watched the recording, it wasn't that bad, but in the moment I felt like destroyed. I felt like I completely lost my pace, my confidence mid through the presentation. Like I felt like an imposter, really. So and I vividly remember that presentation. Yeah. And by the way, later on I became friends with that person then. Yeah.
That's often how it works, isn't it?
Yeah. And we chatted right after my presentation. He sort of said like, good presentation. Like he's a super nice person. and he was sort of encouraging me after presentation, and he told me some things he liked in the presentation, and so I sort of regrouped my confidence, but but in the moment I was sweating bullets.
Oh, those bullets again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I for me, sometimes, funny enough, the most memorable ones are where there's technical failures.
Yeah, I remember some of those at Meeting
Yeah.
C++ for you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So, the keynote last November, that was a good example, but probably more. But I was quite calm about it, because when you've gone through some of the more extreme ones, it's just like, nah, that's nothing. I think one time where the AV system, the previous speaker had been having trouble. This is a conference years ago. And the previous speaker had been having trouble, and then it had been getting more and more problematic. And when they got to my talk, they said, no, we've got it sorted out, Kevlin. We think we've got the system sorted out. Like, nothing's coming through. So I'm standing there, nothing's happening, standing there, and it's just like, okay. I thought, this is fine. And for some reason, I started telling jokes. Now, I'm not naturally a joke-telling person. I don't think that I've got a good memory for this stuff, but I managed to remember a few geeky jokes, and then then started with some stories and messing about. And this was quite good fun. And then after a few minutes, it's like nothing is happening. And I thought, right, okay, at this point, and for me, I had just finished preparing my slides that morning, so they were fresh in my head. And so I said, okay, at this point, we're going to start the talk. And I told people, okay, I want you to imagine that there's a slide up there, and this is the font, this is what it says, this is this, and now I'm going to click, and you're going to see that it reveals the next slide, which has got these details, and it's got, and then the next slide is about this, and there's a few points that come, and then I started talking through. After about 5 minutes of this, the actual slides appeared, which was actually quite disappointing by that point. But it was a case of that one taught me that I could do a talk without. I could stand there without slides, and that was put into practice at the Build Stuff conference in Vilnius 2 years ago, where they could not get the AV working. We tested it before. But this is one of those things, when you test it, it's no good if somebody says, come and test it, and then they change the configuration, because that means your tests are worthless. We know this from software. So I got and tested. It absolutely worked. And they said, oh, yeah, but for the speaker in front of you who's actually playing music and doing all, we've changed everything. And it's just like, well, that's not the test. That's not the setup I had. And it turns out that it wasn't coming through. And we started, me and the MC were just kind of like, okay, let's see if we can solve this. And eventually I said, after a few minutes, it's like, we're not getting anywhere with this. I'm going to do the talk without slides at all. So, I did it. Obviously, it wasn't a code-centric talk, but it turned out that I could remember enough, and I had to shorten anyway about 10 minutes off it. So, yeah, talks without slides. It's doable.
I vividly remember at the C++ conference in Italy, when I gave a talk, I was, unfortunately, due to the lack of sleep the night before, I was suddenly in the afternoon getting very tired, and then came my talk. And so what happened was, during my talk, I got into the zone, and I kept talking, but I got the pacing totally wrong. And at some point, I realized there is no way that this talk doesn't end early. And I think the thing that saved me is that it was a talk about the community. And so I ended my talk on the premise that now I have left some time for you, because I would like to discuss this with you, like about the community, about user groups and stuff like that. And at first there was total silence, and then slowly it picked up, and we actually had an engaging discussion. And this kind of saved this and made this talk memorable to me, but also kind of, it's like your pacing and your flow in your talk is really important to take care of. We actually do have some questions now. So let's start with this question. is there any presentation tips specific to C++, and what are they?
Choose a bigger font.
Yes.
I'm going to go with that one because, and again, I'm going to go back to, if you are presenting code, whether it's from an IDE or you're presenting a slide, whatever font you've chosen is probably too small. And you're going, yeah, but how do I put all the angle brackets and the double colons and all the qualification and all the rest of it? I don't know. That's your problem to solve. But don't make it so that I, as a viewer, have to solve it. It's not my problem to solve. It's the speaker's problem to solve. And there are many, many different techniques. I mean, sometimes it suggests maybe you put a little bit too much stuff in there anyway, and I wouldn't like to read that as code on a screen in the first place. Maybe that's the universe telling you that. But another one is, there's simplifications, and sometimes it's okay to simplify things, either code-wise. I'll just throw auto in a few places I might not otherwise normally use. Or just if you are in control of this, in other words, if it's on a slide, ... is your friend. Just leave something out and go, yeah, there's a whole load of stuff. Have it on a previous thing. Sometimes what I do is I will show, here's the code, and I intentionally tell people, you can't read this, but I want to show you the big picture. Next slide, we zoom in, we throw away the detail, and we align stuff so that what you're left with is the thing you're supposed to look at. And I say this because C++ is a language that, for all its syntax abbreviations, spends for every addition to the language that reduces the amount of syntax I have to write, there's another one that compensates to increase the amount of syntax I have to write. There's a kind of conservation law. I don't know what we're going to call it, but it's certainly a lot of stuff, and you need to be aware of that, because that's probably not your message, unless your message is, hey, let's talk about all this syntactic noise. So really, just from a C++ perspective, recognize the amount of detail that you may be massively comfortable with through familiarity, looking at the same code on your screen on a day-to-day basis, is not what somebody in an audience sitting 50 meters back from a screen is going to see. They're not going to see that, and it's the first time they've seen this, and you are going to overwhelm with detail. Detail management that's the visually, intellectually, all the rest of it. That's the thing that C++ can really hit the limit on very quickly.
Yeah, so I was about to talk about boilerplate, but sort of Kevlin already took care of that, because I hate C++ tends to be a sort of boilerplate heavy language. So I like it when presenters sort of take out the boilerplate and sort of warn that it's sort of slideware, but take it out so that I can see the essentials, not the ceremony around it. That was my number one pick. So I'm glad that Kevlin gave it a good exposition. So my second thing, pet peeve, is when I see C++ presentations that assume an expert audience. And by that, I can mean different things. Either the technique or the thing that's presented, it's very advanced. And I believe that very advanced topics are much better suited for lengthy blog posts or articles than presentations in 45 or 50 minutes, because you need time for questions. So very advanced topics, I think, are better for blog posts, longer blog posts, where you can go in details. You can do a multi-part blog post. You can do a story, any way you want it, right? Not a 45 or 50-minute presentation where you rush through a bunch of complicated things and you lose 90% of the audience. So I have a pet peeve with sort of people trying to go through very advanced topics in sort of general conference presentations. And also when they assume everyone is sort of on the C++ standard. So they would start quoting paper numbers and giving excerpts from the ISO specification. And, this thing works like that because of this clause in the standard and whatever. I don't care about that clause in the standard. Explain why it's like that. Don't quote the standard as defense for the thing, right? It's like a lawyer quoting a precedent and saying, I should win this case because there's a precedent. No, explain why that thing works that way, why it has that value, why it has that property. So assuming sort of that everyone is an expert, or sort of making some references and assuming that everyone knows the stuff, it's something that I don't like. And I think we can improve this. And I've seen it predominantly at C++ conferences, where people sort of assume everyone is expert audience.
Yeah, I think that's very true. The other thing which I like to do, and I also as a speaker, and it helps you as a speaker, is to highlight the part of the code you're actually talking about. Because often there is like, a lot of code and you can remove some part and you can, use your 3 dots. But what are you actually talking about, and what are the important parts of the code example, which you cannot really boil down to just that feature, especially like if you're not talking about a new standard feature, which just is kind of clear that you cover that. This is very helpful.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Jens has just said. That's a technique that I think is hugely underused, highlighting. I like to use that a lot in my code when presenting it. Here's the full thing, and I'll either change size or I will highlight something. And sometimes where I'm highlighting structure and change, then I will, here's the color for this, and everything else fades to nearly black, or whatever the background color is. You're managing somebody else's attention. Draw their eye to it. You have a lot of control. You have a lot more versatility than I think you may recognize you have. You use that capability.
And then we have a question about the best example of handling a very technical part well in a talk, or how you would make it easier and not too in-depth, or simplifying things if it's technical.
Is the question alluding to like an example to a C++ presentation that does this well, or
is it a general observation here?
It's a general question. I mean, of course, you're talking about C++ and giving C++ conferences, but like, how do you handle like something very technical in a talk? And I think like try to simplify it, and it's, in my opinion, that's always a hint to, do you need to really cover this, and in what detail? So maybe having to point at something is good, but you don't have to go in depth if it's not like on the topic of your talk.
I can explain what works for me when I'm in the audience. For example, and I have a concrete presentation in mind that I've recently seen in Bristol at ACCU. So when there's like a very complicated thing that sort of the underlying theory is complicated, or machinery or the language specification is very complicated, for me, it doesn't work like if you explain the rules and how they interact with each other. So seeing examples, and if I see a lot of examples in various sort of combinations or various variations of examples, it really helps me sort of understand and grasp the concepts better. And I've seen a good example of this presentation. I've seen Jonathan Mueller present at ACCU this year, talk about object lifetimes. And it's not what you think. It's not about constructors and destructors. It's like about pointers and provenance and when things become extant or not. And so anyway, so it's super detailed and super more than your average C++ programmer needs to know. So it's definitely falls in the advanced category. But I think he did a very good job of explaining and walking through the examples and explanations without relying on theory too much, and just sort of showing, like, reveal an example. And I felt like I grasped everything, although there were some really scary things in there. And I definitely didn't know, like, at least a quarter of the information was brand new information for me. So I think that was a good example.
Yeah, I think there's a building on what Victor said about examples. Literally build on examples. If you build something up, you have a gain with a progression of slides is you can easily construct something more complex, one idea at a time. Each slide has one responsibility. That's not normally how code is presented. You open up a file and there it all is. Here you have an opportunity to control the time axis and build it up. If there's a complex idea and it can be decomposed, then decompose it and build it up. The other one that I found that I started using a number of years ago, and probably as a result of doing training courses, is I kind of often follow a kind of a wave or a sine curve type model. In other words, very high level view, and I'll use one particular choice of phrasing and then deep. And the point is that people who are new to the idea, they pick up something. And then for the people who really need the jargon and the detail, there's something else. And this happens over a period of minutes. In other words, you don't make the talk get progressively hard. You're always going simple, complex, simple, complex, simple, complex. The people who are picking up the simple stuff don't necessarily notice that you're doing this. Everybody else who's maybe picking up the more complex stuff doesn't notice the simple stuff because it acts as an introduction for them. And it's actually also a reminder. Remember that most things that help people who are at a more entry level also help people who aren't, because it cues them back in. It's a point that Victor was making. Cues you back in. Maybe people zone out. Maybe there was something like that. Who knows? Maybe this is just something they're not familiar with. People can have a massive amount of expertise, but that just means they probably know a few things in different places, and there are huge gaps in their knowledge. People don't know everything. So you offer people a natural introduction, a welcoming introduction. So as you go through, there's always a simpler way of explaining something that's an entry level that makes sense. And it may have you reaching for metaphors or simpler examples. The point is that you can do this, but you have to be aware that you want to do this, and you can kind of tell when you're not doing it because people start glazing over. You end up talking to one person in the audience. In the worst case, it's you. But take that journey. Realize that you can say in 2 sentences, you can cover quite a lot of space, and you can even repeat yourself. The way I think about it, but using different phrasing. The way I think about it is, if you're going to paint a wall, if you're using a roller, you don't just roll up. You roll up and then down over the same piece. You cover the same idea at least twice. But you don't let people don't feel that. They just feel that it's well covered.
That is true. So that's actually an interesting question here. What are the challenges of speaking of C++ on a non-pure C++ conference?
What's a non-pure C++ conference?
Mixed language, I presume.
Right.
It doesn't have CPP in the title. C++ in the title. There you go.
I can give a nice. I have a nice recall from I don't know, maybe 2018 or 2019. I don't remember exactly. I spoke at NDC, but not NDC Tech Town, which is predominantly a C++ conference. But I spoke at NDC Oslo, which is mostly a .NET conference. But back then had a native languages track, let's call it. It wasn't like a C++ track, but it was mostly C++, let's face it. And it was interesting. It was the smallest track. By the way, NDC also, it's a huge conference. They have 10 parallel tracks or something like that. It goes into like a stadium arena, like it's huge audience. 10 parallel tracks. And of course, the C++/native languages track was the tiniest audience, right? And the funniest experience was that we each knew everyone, like in the C++ track. We were mostly speakers and friends of speakers, and we all attended each other's talks, and we were in that track all day, right? So it's like a sort of small family kind of track where everyone knew everyone, and we basically entertained ourselves with interesting presentations. So, and mostly all other people ignored us. And occasionally you would have your sort of stray attendee who probably got lost and ended up in the C++ track, or was curious to find out what's going on beyond the fence. And it was interesting to sort of get I've never had a direct question in the presentation from one of these people, but a couple of them approached us sort of one-on-one after presentation to ask about a particular topic or idea in one of the presentations. And it was interesting to have sort of insights from beyond the pale, right? People who either used C++ in the past and having been doing so for a couple of years, been switching to .NET, and they were sort of wondering what's going on with modern C++. And either people sort of who never had any exposure to C++, but they were sort of interested or had tangential connection, or they either had to consume some C++ library from .NET, or they had to build or port some library, and they were learning about C++ or sort of fell into some traps, and they were sort of new to the game. And it's always interesting to get insights from people that are not in your bubble. We forget that we sort of live in these kinds of bubbles. So I enjoyed the experience. So although I felt out of place attending a non-pure C++ conference. I like the formulation, but I enjoyed the experience. I think I learned quite a bit by interacting with people outside my bubble.
I'm going to use that bubble terminology. It's perfect. So I inhabit a lot of different bubbles, and I think there's more than one answer to this question in this sense. What are the challenges of speaking of C++ in a non-pure C++ conference? In other words, the question is, what is the nature of the conference? Because if somebody said, hey, we're an embedded conference, then yeah, there's going to be a lot of C++, but you're also getting a lot of C people. You're going to get a lot of other people, and there's a whole load of scripting that goes on there as well. So that's a very different crowd to say exactly the one you. And I go to NDC quite a lot, although not next week, which is also NDC Oslo, not this year. And those have a particular focus with a different center of gravity. So in other words, it's really what's the nature of the conference? Who are you speaking to? What's the makeup of the audience? And how central is the C++ to what you're trying to say? And what I mean by this is C++ part of your talk because it's an example of a bigger theme. So for example, let's say I want to talk about technical debt. That's kind of like an every language, every system thing. Okay. Yeah. The fact is I might choose some C++ examples. And if that is your comfort zone and the stuff that you are working on a day-to-day basis, and you can draw your experience from that, that's great, but it's not a C++ talk. It's a talk that uses C++. So you need to understand that, and that there may be things that you would not say. There may be points about, very, very nerdy specific points about particular versions and deprecations. You don't need to say that. Everybody understands version problems. Find what your message is. What is it you're trying to tell somebody? Are you trying to tell somebody about something that's in C++ 98 and has been deprecated, or are you trying to talk about language evolution? Because a lot of people aren't going to know about C++ 98 deprecated withdrawn stuff, but they sure know about how languages evolve. They experience that all the time. So find what your message is. Where does C++ fit in your talk? If you are trying to show somebody you have a talk about really weird aspects of move semantics, then you are at the wrong conference. That's your challenge, is you submitted to the wrong conference. That is not the right place for that. So the point there is find out how central, so find out who is your audience, what is the likely C++ishness of the audience, but also what is your message? It gets you talking about that. Is C++ my home base and that is what I'm using to demonstrate a point? Or is it actually about C++? Or is your talk indeed, I'm introducing C++ to non-C++ers, in which case you found your audience. Well done. So, that's the thing, is I think it's quite broad. What is the nature of the talk? What is the nature of your message? What is the nature of the target conference?
That is true. So, very simple question. How much time does it take to prepare a talk usually?
Oh, the mileage varies a lot. From person to person, from topic to topic, from whatever. So I've had talks that I prepared maybe in a couple of days, and they turned out great. And I've had talks that I've been working on at least a year, if not more. And I've had talks that I've had to polish over the years. For example, recently I did people have been asking me literally to do a reprise of an older talk about regular types, right? And I've worked on that in 2017 or 2018, and even today, when I did like a regular revisited, and I sort of re-went through the topic and recombed it and retuned it and updated for C++ 20 concepts, and I even brought in sort of Rust references and parallels, and I keep expanding and changing it, and I still feel that it's a work in progress, and it still feels like I'm working on it, like after that many years, right? So I've spent months on talks, I've spent days on talks, but I would say my usual technique is, whenever I have a topic in mind, I always start a Google Doc, and I start a Google Doc and I start gathering notes. So I'll read an article, I'll just open the doc, paste the link, or I'll find an idea, I'll write 2 paragraphs in the document. Then after a few weeks, I'll revisit the document, I'll find new information, or I'll have a new insight, a new idea, or I might try some code, or I might see some code, or I might see a tweet, or whatever, something that's related to the topic. So I have all these sort of parallel documents that I have ongoing with ideas that are brewing. And when I feel like I have enough material in one of those documents, I say, okay, now it's ready. Let me shape up an arch, a story. Let me sort of build a draft abstract and maybe think where it would be suited to submit this. But I always have, like, even now, I have like a couple of, some of them are immature. Some of them are just like a document with two sentences in them. Like it's like a germ of an idea, but I have nothing more. But I know at some point in a few years, that will be a talk when I gather enough insight material. Or I have documents where like I have pages and pages of notes and documents and links and snippets of code and stuff that just jammed in that document waiting to become a talk. And I procrastinate in writing an abstract for it. But this is my general technique. I start gathering these things in parallel, and when I'm happy with one of them, I'll just say, okay, now I'll submit it to see how it happens.
Yeah, I tend to be slightly less organized than Victor. Slightly, that's an understatement. But I do have files and bits and pieces where I keep ideas for talks, and often they are triggered by something that I've read. And I think, oh, actually, this idea, it's kind of like talks often come about not because of an idea, but because one idea combines with another idea in my head. And you suddenly go, oh, wait a minute, there's a thing here. Or it kind of branches off from an existing talk. And so I may make a note about that when I've given a talk, somebody's asked a question, or I've had a thought. And then you have the slow build up. And but I don't normally finalize. I don't normally, often I actually will put in an abstract before I've got the talk, and I will use acceptance as the driver. But in other cases, my talks, they often overlap, they're related. In other words, sometimes you find a new talk comes from either a lightning talk, or there's a small section in another talk and you feel you wanted to give more time to that. Oh, in fact, going back to what I said earlier, sometimes you consistently miss out a section. You've done a talk a number of times. I've had this a couple of times where I've missed out a section every single time I've given it. And I start thinking, I have more and more to say about this thing that I'm never delivering. Maybe it's a talk in its own right. It's clearly a coherent thing. It's one idea. Maybe I need to grow that. Yeah, exactly. Give it the opportunity. Give it a name. This is what we do in code. It's the same idea. It just grows. Your awareness of it and what gathers around that grows. So sometimes a talk can be on the back burner in my head or sitting there in a file for a long time. And then the actual act of creating slides or creating code, and again, depends also on how much additional reading. Am I talking about something where I tend not to like to use references if I haven't read them, for example. And, sometimes I will just use, and particularly if it's very relevant. So it's just, I need to put time aside to read that. I need to put time aside to write the code. Or is it code that I've got and I want to simplify? It depends on the nature of the talk. So it's often not in the slides. But then when it comes to the slides, often there are borrowings or ideas between existing talks. And then this, I will say, the more talks you have built up, the more likely it is you'll be able to draw from stuff you already have, even if it's just formatting. But sometimes there are triggers. I use a lot of photographs because that makes it interesting for me. I take photographs, and so that's something in my style. And sometimes I'll be looking at something and just going through photographs, looking for something else, and it will say, "Oh, here's a photograph," and it suddenly makes me think of a point or a quote or a slide I want to use, and it's just like, well, let's put that in. So the talk can grow very organically, and sometimes that happens over weeks in advance, but sometimes it can be the day before, or even hours and minutes before. So I don't have a set blocked time structure. Some people do, and I'm going to go back to what I said in my talk about everybody is different in this one. You need to find out the person that you are. My level of comfort is having these things bubble up, and then just like, the universe throws two ideas together and gives me an hour every now and then, or just like a few hours before a talk. It's like, right, now we're doing it. And I rely on that. Other people really want to have more planning and more control, and that works for them. And that's how they expand their talk, or they grow it in a modular fashion. Okay, lots of different people, lots of different styles. But the one thing I can say is I genuinely don't know how long it takes, because they are so different. I don't know what distribution it is, so I can't even say it's there's an average, so that it's meaningful. But it varies a lot.
Yeah, I have one more add-on here. By the way, Kevlin, I love your photographs when you photograph books, like the real book with the quote that you want to highlight from that book.
It does actually make it more memorable. This is one of the things I discovered is people remember, and I remember. I know that's there.
Exactly, and I made a point about this when I did the presentation earlier, when I said that people sneak in these kinds of tokens and monikers and sort of mementos so that you can connect back to the talk, and it works. It really works. So what add-on that I wanted to make here, like. When I said I have these sort of documents that I sort of have ideas in cooking at various stages, some more advanced, some are just a germ of an idea. Even for the ones that are very developed, and I have lots of material, but I never script my talks. So what I have in those documents is not scripts for talks. It's just materials, code snippets, ideas, quotes, links, and so on. So resources. And I have some of these documents, they're sort of intimidating at this point. I have a bunch of them that are reach so much content, and I have so high expectations of the stuff that I'm going to produce out of that document that it's intimidating to start. So I fell into this trap where I've gathered so much material and I built so much expectations of what I should deliver out of that topic that I procrastinate actually doing it. And sometimes I even fall in other traps. And I want to stress that it's a trap. For example, I've been cooking on a particular topic or technique or idea for so long, and then I see an awesome presentation about this very same thing, and I feel like, oh, there's no point in me doing that because I've already seen an awesome presentation about this, and now I just I wasted all that material, all that time, and there's no point in me doing it. That's totally wrong, because I can present it in a different way. I can present it differently. Like I said earlier, I can build a fence around my idea. I can say how I do it or how I view it is different from the other thing. I can contrast, right? Although the other thing might be immensely valuable and I enjoy it so much, right? So, but I psychologically, sometimes you feel like, oh, what's the point in trying? Because person, whatever, did an awesome job on that thing that I wanted to do, and I procrastinated and they stole my thunder, right? No, that's not a lost opportunity. You can still spin it your way, put your mark on it, show your point of view, show you how you do it differently, and even draw inspiration and build upon their work. But this happened to me a couple of times where I procrastinated and then I saw an awesome job on that thing that was so close to what I wanted to do, right?
It kind of happened last year when I was happy to see the talk being submitted, and then it made it to the online part, and I was like so curious about a talk which was about a topic where I also was looking into, like, how do you start a project, how do you go on with CMake and stuff like that. And it was a very nice talk, but it was completely different from what I would have, like what my own vision of something like that in my head was. And on one point I was like kind of happy about that, because it still kind of made my talk, which I gave this spring in my user group about my project, kind of be more novel and have, like, cover something which they didn't mention. And also I could, of course, it's like another cheap way to add more time and point to other people in your talk, basically, to include the title slides or the links to the videos from other talks where you, like, say, well, man, this is now, I could go on about this topic, but it's not the topic of the talk. But if you want to know more about multi-threading, here's a talk from Ryan Grum about multi-threading, or hey, here's Victor talking about regular types, but I don't want to talk about regular types. So if you want to know what a regular type is, here's maybe the page for CPP reference about it, and Victor gave a talk about it. And the time of preparing a talk, often it comes to me like when I have been working on something for some time, and then I want to speak about that, and so I'm like already prepared for it, but I kind of know that I have to kind of figure it out. And that's like another thing I want to point out is people submit ideas, not finished talks, to conferences often when it's something new. And then when the talk is accepted, the time that is left until the conference is the time it takes to prepare the talk, because it's very, very common to keep working on your talk. As you practice your talk, you will find out that certain slides need to be changed, and that you had the order was like right when you wrote it, but when you practice it, you find out that the order of certain slides is just wrong. It doesn't fit you. It destroys your flow or other things. And so it's very normal to keep working on talks, even when they're like kind of like finished in a certain way that you could give them. But the ultimate time is until you have to give the talk, you can add something. And a lot of people use that.
And we all know a couple of people who are very good at delivering technical presentations and are famous for preparing them on the flight to the conference or the night before in the hotel room. You know who you are. But they do a tremendous job at delivering them. And that doesn't mean the talk is not prepared. The talk is in their head, right? But it's not in slide form. So they would spend a couple of hours either on the plane right there to the conference or the night before in the hotel to actually pour down all the ideas into slide form.
I think that's
we know
exactly
the people.
That idea, the preparation. I'm going to confess to being slightly guilty here, but that idea of just being in the flow of it, you've been thinking about it for weeks and months.
Yeah.
And the point is that then there's the talk in that moment. Do we count all of that time? I don't know. I don't know how that one works. So the point there is that it's not just the slide time, it's all the other time that goes in. That all acts as foundation. Yeah, when you're worrying, and this is actually quite important if you're new to this, if you're worrying that you're not preparing your talk, actually you are preparing your talk. The fact that you're thinking about it and wondering, does this go with this, or what am I going to do? How do I sequence? I've got a fork in my talk where I could go to this topic or this topic to then come back, but I need to cover both of these. What's the ordering between them? How do I evolve that? That's preparation. That is part of the preparation process. That you're doing work with that, and your brain is running some great background threads on that. So you'll be at peace with that.
And I think we're reaching the end of the panel, so let's close with a wonderful question. Which are common mistakes that should be avoided during a talk?
Oh, so maybe you left the longest question. Yeah, it's a short question, but the longest answer till last. Good
You're
job.
only allowed 2 words, Kevlin.
Yeah, we should time box this one or limit
Yeah.
it in some way.
Oh, well, if you have an answer to this, go ahead.
Honestly, use a bigger font. So yeah, that I've already banged that one, but yes, yeah, that's one.
Okay.
My pet peeve is when speakers try to cram too much content in the time format they're allotted. Let's say they have 50 minutes, 60 minutes, and they just try to cover too much and they go too fast. That's my pet peeve. Like, I would rather see half of that content and show me the second half next year or at a different conference. I don't want to sort of run to keep up with you. So my pet peeve is speakers who speak really fast and try to cover too much ground.
And actually, particularly if you are relatively new to speaking, or consider yourself new to speaking, and you also may have asked questions like, what do I talk about? Guess what? You have your answer, exactly as Victor said. Guess what? You have more than one talk there. You just didn't recognize it as more than one talk. Use it as an opportunity.
Yeah. So refactor your talks, people. You need fewer slides and not rushing through them. And I don't mean like talking fast. Some people have a natural rhythm of talking fast. I'm talking about sort of shooting concepts at the audience and sort of fire hosing information at the audience. I'm not talking here about the rhythm and passion of talking. I'm talking about the amount of information that you spew out towards the audience.
Yeah, I think it's like, and it's always already somebody talked about silence, and I think that for speakers, it's also sometimes important to take a break and give people some time to sort what you said.
Get back on the bus.
Yes, and that's like actually like at my conference, I point this out, and I really tell speakers to drink, and I think that's the one big and common mistake which a lot of speakers do, that they do not use that glass of water which is on stage for you. It's a very good technique to use this when you like ask a question to the audience or generally take a break, that you get your drink. Because when you speak, you lose a lot of water and you need to replace that water during your talk. And some places like the Andes is very much guilty of that. The AC is literally out there to kill you if you're speaking. So you need to drink. So that's why I tell, especially my keynote speakers, don't forget to drink, because I have regularly speakers which have a headache or something because of that later in the day. And so that is my tip for speakers: drink. It's also a great technique to get a break when you're on stage and to control your pacing. Yeah. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
So that brings us to the end of the panel. I want to thank Kevlin and Victor for taking the time and being here, and especially also thank you, Diego, who had to leave, for coming here, giving a talk, and being part of this.
Thanks for inviting us, Jens, and thanks everyone for attending and all the questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. I hope that's been helpful.
Yeah. That's actually something I heard a couple of times now from speakers, that they find this very helpful. And so thank you for sharing your views and your opinions, and thank you to the audience and for the questions. So with that, I think it's time to end this after, oh my God, 2.5 hours.